Hello, everyone, and welcome to Be the Bank. We greatly appreciate you coming tonight. My name is Shane Roach. I'm co-founder of Creative Real Estate University. And through Creative Real Estate University, what we try to do is help out new investors with all things real estate, how to find deals, how to underwrite them. We look at fix and flip properties. We're doing buy and holds. But one of the things that the number one thing that always comes back to new investors is they want to know how to get the funds to do a deal. And one of those ways, it always comes back to, hey, we're going to talk to the bank. When you first start out, a lot of times you're talking to an institution bank and you're trying to get funds to do your deal that way. What we're going to talk about tonight is a little different. Over the years, what we've found is by being the bank, being the person who brings the funds to the deal, puts you in a different leverage position. Not every deal has to be done by having equity stake in the deal. You don't have to be the owner of the deal. We're actually going to talk about tonight. There's actually an advantage of being the bank, being the money provider. You don't have to worry about all the headaches. You don't have to worry about the contractors. You don't have to worry about how managing tenants. The way the bank operates and thinks puts you in a winning position to make money on every deal without all the headaches. So it's a much different way to come at real estate. And I just want to give everybody that opportunity. So I'm going to share my screen and we're going to walk through this presentation. And again, tonight we're going to talk is an educational journey. We're not going to talk about any deals. We're not going to pitch you any any properties that we're trying to raise capital for. I want to talk and provide an educational background as the journey that we've gone through and how we've done real estate and how it's evolved over the years. I did my first fix and flip back in 1992. School of Hard Knocks through all of those years. Now we are on both sides of the table. Sometimes we're lenders on deals, sometimes we're borrowers. And I wanted you to understand the difference because sometimes being the bank puts you in the best position. So I have a presentation. It's called Be the Bank, a private capital field guide, and how smart investors can earn consistent returns without owning property. Oh, if I can get the presentation and move forward. Here we go. So again, kind of an important disclaimer. This is for educational purposes only. I'm not soliciting for any specific deal, and I want you to do your own due diligence on any deal that you're going to be the bank in, that you're going to provide funds on. All investments involve risk, including loss of principal. So do your own due diligence. Do not take the shortcuts. Do not take the easy path. If you do your homework correctly, this will put you in a very, very safe position, but you have to do your homework. And the reason I created this guide is not everybody knows that they can actually be the bank on a deal. If you can provide the funds, you have a whole different leverage into real estate. A lot of people have been taught, hey, if you just find the right property, everything else will work out just fine. That belief is understandable, but it's a very incomplete picture to how real estate works. The quiet force behind every deal always comes back to capital. The real estate media, all the social media gurus, all those courses you can buy online, a lot of them come back to ownership. Buy this house, flip that house, manage a rental, get 10 rentals and you'd be financially free. Flipping properties or scaling a portfolio, those are all those programs that are flashy and get your attention, But what rarely gets discussed is the quiet force behind every one of those deals is the capital. Every project, no matter how creative or sophisticated, requires money. And whoever controls those funds, that money, controls the outcome. And I want to put you in that driver's seat. I didn't really set out to teach people how to become the bank. That wasn't our goal when we started doing private money lending. But like most investors, as we were chasing down deals and analyzing properties, and what we've learned through our own experiences, because we've been on both sides of the table, right? We've been private money lenders ourselves. We definitely use private money for many deals. But over time, what we see is there's certain patterns that do emerge. Some people are constantly stressed, juggling timelines, surprises, especially contractors. It's real estate. Cindy and I have a whole series of stories we could tell you about surprises when it comes to real estate, whether it's a tree fell on a house, septic tanks that fail at the worst opportune time, tenants that don't pay and they don't move out either. All those things, if you are the owner, those are now your problems, but they're not the bank's problems. But what we find is those people who control the capital were always on the right side of the deal. So kind of what we're going to cover tonight is how a bank thinks and understanding that the mindset behind the capital and you protecting that capital is very important. Understanding risk and how risk is structured from the perspective of the bank, and that framework can create very predictable outcomes. And how to participate from the position of strength. By positioning yourself as the capital provider, you put yourself in a very strong part of the deal. So this is not a promise of easy money. It's definitely not a promise of easy money, but this is an introduction to a different way of thinking and viewing investing. So why, chapter 1, we talk about why banks get paid first and how banks get paid first. Banks win because their position is engineered, designed to do so. Banks don't win because they're lucky. Banks don't go into a deal thinking that maybe they'll get paid. They win because their positions are designed and built that way. So when a bank participates, it's very conservative in the leverage. So again, when you do your underwriting, and we'll talk about that, is you have to be very conservative about your outcomes and stick to your guns. We have collateral requirements always and every time. We have a defined exit for the project, and we like to have a backup plan, at least one. And we always have a good plan A, but we always want to see a great plan B and have a plan C in the wings. And have legal protections, have legal documents recorded and run through an attorney. On the other hand, a lot of investors jump into real estate after watching YouTube University, and they say, hey, you can get into a deal, no money down. And all those things are very flashy and hopeful. But what we find is a lot of investors get in trouble that way too. They jump in, they're over leveraged, they're underprepared, and they don't really have a great contingency plan. So, and we skip through a lot of assumptions because we have a fear of missing out on a really good deal and we're trying to go too fast. We want to really pump the brakes, stick to our guns when it comes to our underwriting, and be really conservative in our numbers. And if we can do that, we'll have a win every time. So a couple of great stories for you. As the property owner versus the equity investor versus the lender, these are all different participants or could be different participants in the same deal. And again, a lot of times people talk about, well, you want to be the person who's going to buy the house, buy the rental, do the fix and flip. Sometimes we do that and we bring in an invested and an equity partner or a private money partner. Um, Sometimes you just go out and find a private money lender or a hard money lender to fund that deal. They all have different positions, they all have different risks involved. The way that kind of works is if the project struggles and the timeline goes longer than planned, if the market shifts, so the project got done on time, but we couldn't sell the house, all of a sudden those outcomes diverge really, really quickly. The equity position investor absorbs the losses first. And that seems kind of counterintuitive at first, but they have all the risks. So as the equity investor, they were eyeballing that $50,000 or $100,000 profit on that deal. But as carrying costs go on, as potential markets decline, all of a sudden all that equity potential that they had, they're watching it erode very, very quickly. And if it comes down to it, well, they have to fire sale the house to get the bank paid off. The property owner, the equity investor, they're the ones that actually couldn't take the loss first. If you're structured correctly as a bank, you're going to get your funding because you structured the deal based around your conservative numbers. So it's because of that position that it's actually the safest spot to be. It's not always that big sexy side, because as we do a fix and flip and we have a potential for that $100,000 investment, usually the lender in the deal, their return is a fixed point. So you don't have all that upside that is so flashy, but you also get rid of all the risk. So let's talk about the capital stack. The capital stack and understanding private capital, it's not a technical finance concept. It's just how the money and the risk are all stacked together. So the question is, who gets paid first and who absorbs the losses first? So most of the new investors, they never really ask this questions, but banks will ask it on every deal. So understanding that is very, very important. So we have what's called the senior debt or the first lien position, the senior secured position. These are all terms, all kind of revolving around the same security position of a deal. The senior lender positions, they get paid first. They are secured by the collateral, aka the house. They have the first legal rights to default. So if the lender is not performing, we have the option to foreclose and take over the property. And then that's a whole nother path and a whole nother show talking about that, but we will cover it this year. The position of that senior secured position is designed to preserve the capital. So as the bank, as the primary lender, you're secured against that asset. Sometimes we'll talk about what's called mezzanine debt. This is also called secondary capital. It also calls itself the second lien position, the third lien position, junior lien positions. These are where there's a lot of risk. And if you are a brand new private money lender, you should really take caution in the deal and making sure that you understand all the risks associated with it, because that senior position, they're going to get paid out first. So if the deal isn't structured with enough equity, in case of, that good plan B, now you're the one taking the risk. And of course, the very, very last position is that equity ownership position. So that owner of the property who was planning on making all the money, really, if the deal goes bad, they're the ones that either walk away with zero, or worse, they end up owing the bank after they even lose the property. So be careful what position you are in. Again, one deal, understanding those three different positions, we can look at three different potential outcomes. If you look at a standard house deal that we look at in a single family house, not looking at some of the fancier high-end houses that we do, but $200,000 isn't a bad purchase price kind of as a target median household with a fairly light renovation budget, light to medium, not a full gut. So this is about a $50,000 expected outcome. We would hope to make $300,000 as a sale price or ARV on that project. So if you were the owner, right, you're coming into this and you pick that up, there is some work that you could do and how we can structure that deal so you get a good profit. If you bring on an equity partner or if you are the equity partner, you can split some of that profit. But as a private money lender, if you can come in and bring 175,000, not the full 200,000, because you want to make sure that there's always some protection in there. Because once the rehab is started, usually the price of the property drops first. And if the project is delayed, you still have the collateral of the house. You want to make sure that we can take that asset back, go to a plan B, which is maybe a fire sale, reduce the price and get it sold wherever it's at in the renovation cycle, or take over the project and finish it. That's a lot of smart private money lenders I know have done that as an exit strategy because they can bring the funds or their expertise to finish the project. Now they have the ability to recap and recoup their original investment and maybe even make some money on a deal above and beyond what they originally put into it. It's all about the power of position. A lot of new investors misjudge some of the risks around that. Again, when we're first starting out in real estate, trying to figure out our path, there is fear of missing out, that FOMO. And I've seen it happen to a lot of different people. Is like they're so focused on getting their deal that they're missing all the red flags. And it's always good, especially in a newer deal, if this is kind of new for you, run it by somebody who's experienced. We'll be more than happy to take a look at the deals and just kind of give you our opinion as to, hey, is this a good deal or not? Because we want you to be successful. We want you to look and make sure that you're not ignoring the red flags, and just say, hey, if you follow down this path, you have a very good chance of making your return goals for that project. We don't want you to go into this and go, man, if I did all these things and they all work well, you have carrying costs, you have unexpected overruns. If you don't budget for some of those things, all of a sudden a $50,000 profits, really you're looking to make 5,000 was really those 6 to 8 months of all your sweat, blood, and tears worth $5,000. The risk may not be worth the reward. So we kind of want to talk about my shift from deal chasing to capital thinking. So as we've evolved over the years, and if you joined us along our journey of Creative Real Estate University with Cindy and I, we went from looking at hundreds and hundreds of deals all the time, everything from single family homes to mobile homes to multifamily and storage units, trying to figure out what path we wanted to be on. And what we found is there is a nice balance in the mix of all of those things. You just have to find out what's your rhythm, what's your groove. In my investing career, I believe success came from activity. I did many fix and flips over the years as I'd say an amateur investor because I never set out to be a real estate investor. I just did real estate because I loved it as a hobby. And housing has always been in my blood. I've always liked to remodel houses. I like to I did all the hanging of drywall and re-roofing and plumbing, and I just enjoyed the work. And then I just started collecting assets. Um, but as I analyzed properties consistently, and as I got from that amateur more into a professional investor, um, what I fully didn't appreciate then is how fragile even a good deal can be. Because we've seen good deals when you start off a project, if you're not paying attention to what's happening in market swings, you buy a deal, you say, oh, this is what the projected ARV is going to be in 6, 8 months. Well, that market might already be in decline, and you're already buying a house that you think it's going to be worth 300,000 when you're done, but and the time you get there, it's only worth 275. That was your profit, and your equity's gone. And we've seen projects where you go, man, this is going to be an easy fix and flip, and you get into it and you go, oh man. Once you start opening up walls, the bigger the rehab budget, the more headaches that you're going to come across. Start opening up walls and start getting into utilities. Um, Permit process delays really are a thing in certain markets, right? So we've definitely seen it. As you get into certain cities, you just need to know that, hey, the permit process could be 3 months before you even start. So those are all things you're going to want to make sure you know and understand up front. But at the same time, I know something very important. The people providing the capital were not mostly attached to the outcome. And, me as the investor, I've always kind of get excited about a project. But, you go back to the bank and the underwriting, the loan terms, it's all about the numbers and making the numbers fit a certain box. And if they didn't make the right criteria, it was a go, no go. It really comes down to that simple of a decision-making process. And sometimes it's frustrating when you're on the other side of the table, but from the bank's perspective, once you start looking at it from you being the bank, is get into that analysis mode and say, here's my criteria, and this project fits it or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, you know what? As the bank, I've found that the next deal is just right around the corner because everybody's looking for capital to do their deals. You just got to find the right deal that works for you and your criteria. And that contrast was very impossible for me to ignore as we've gone through this journey. Is like, man, it seems like on that side of the table, it's much more, the water's always calm. Where on the contractor side, or as an equity owner, it's like always seems to be chaos with contractors and supplies and projects that go awry. Um, and as we've dealt with different people, not everybody wants to be full-time real estate investor. They want to share in the profits. They want to have that long-term profit goal, but not all the chaos because they have a family they're trying to take care of. They have a W-2 job that they're trying to take care of. They have life in general that they want to live, but they don't want to have all that chaos. Well, being the bank, those calmer waters fit my model, different parts of my life very, very, very well compared to having to chase down contractors and all the hassles and knock on the doors for tenants and ask for rent. So find out what your avatar is and match that up. That's very important because if that's misaligned, you'll never be happy in this lifestyle. And it's important for you to have that peacefulness in your life. If you can find it, um, what it means to be the bank is to provide capital instead of the labor. If you focus on the repayment of the loan, that meaning is, can the project pay you back? Can the lender pay you back? We want to make sure there's a good plan A, B, and C. And you always want to evaluate that downside scenario first. So when you're being the bank, you always want to know what's that plan C going to look like. And you always want to look at it from the point of this deal is going to default. So how am I going to make money even if the deal goes bad? As the bank, that's very important. Now, if you're other side of the table, you're like, oh, this deal can't go bad. I will always pay back the lender. But as the bank, you always want to look at it from the risk side and say, hey, I need to get my funds back out of this deal. How is it going to happen? I don't want to overlend. I don't want to give it all at once. And I don't want to go over that 70% equity ratio. So if we can get all those things locked in, the deal structured better for you. Kind of understanding that whole process of how private money works. And we talk about hard money, we talk about private money, but the deployment of capital outside of the regular banking channels is actually, it doesn't change much. The whole concept works very well. Most people can understand that, hey, if I bring money to the deal, whether that's coming from the bank or from a private money lender, actually the whole process through escrow and title doesn't really change. And it's a process on the legal side of that is very well understood. So as you go into title and you just say, I'm the private money lender, I always like to say, I'm going to be the bank on this deal. Now they understand their position and your position, and all the paperwork's going to flow just like you were First National Bank. But we want to make sure that we have a defined, well understood use of what those funds are going to be for. How much is going to go for down payment, how much is going to be used for rehab, if any, how much for closing costs, etc. So there's no surprises as to where the money goes. We want to make sure that the collateral is secured with the investment. Right? So we want to make sure that that note is recorded, the deed of trust is recorded. And always go through title because that's their job to make sure that's done right. Get title insurance, but rely on those professionals and your attorney to make sure that the legal documentation is all squared away. Those are free resources for you for the most part. Relying on your title company or your closing attorney. Most of them will have the correct paperwork for the state or the market that you're working in, and just say, here's the amount I'm lending, here are the terms, here's the lender information. You provide me the written legal note, and they'll be good for that state and that area. Then you take that to your attorney and review it. That way you're not trying to draft a note, you're not trying to practice law, doing all that stuff. So I make sure again that we have a clear and well understood exit strategy, a good plan A and a good plan B. And plan C is always a good one to have in the wings. We'll just kind of walk through what that deal structure looks like. This is where we're going to say pump the brakes. Always kind of slow down, especially if this is your first time being a private money lender. We don't want to rush through the deal. We don't want to jump in too fast. We want to make sure we understand the whole deal structure and focus on the outcome, because as the bank, it's the outcome that's most important to you. So when we talk about, 99% of what we do is a fix and flip style loan because it's a shorter term, clear exit strategy type of deal. We're looking at a single family residence. Most of these, aren't horrible conditions. Yes, we've done some full gut projects, but most of them we're looking for and targeting something that is got a clear exit strategy. So we want to find it that in the market that we can resell So we don't want to end up in a house, lending on a house that's in the middle of nowhere. The numbers might look good, but if it's 180 days on market to sell a house in Bumsville, then you better plan on carrying that cost for 6 months. So kind of know your market. It's nice to be in markets that you know that have good traffic, good turnover, good repeatability of resale. That way we know our numbers are solid when we look at ARVs and comps. It's hard to do that if houses aren't selling in that market. So from an operator's point of view, yep, that's a very straightforward project. But from our bank's point of view, we have questions. What new investors focus on? The purchase price, the renovation budget, the projected resale value, the ARV. Um, they're asking, does this deal make me money? Is there enough margin? How fast can I sell it? And those are all great questions for an investor. But at the bank, really what you want to start with is what's that property as is value today? And that's important because that's your collateral. And there you have to be at the right starting point because you're putting that $200,000 up front on a house. And if it's not worth $200,000 today, what happens when that project stops right there? So you kind of have to know what that project is starting off, point A, not worried so much where you're going to end up at point B of the ARV. Now, the next part is how much capital is being lent relative to that value, right? So what's that ratio? And a lot of times we'll talk about that 70 cents on the dollar or 70-cent deal. And there's a lot of math behind that, and there's a good reason for that ratio. Because as we get into, $100,000 deal, staying in that 70% range of that, $70,000, is because if we have to turn around and sell that deal, we have additional closing costs, carrying costs, and profit margin. And that 30% will dwindle very quickly. So if we get above 70%, we're starting to get into the danger zone. We surely don't want to get above 80%. But we'll cover numbers later. And you always want to ask the question, what if? What happens if the renovation takes longer than expected? Those carrying costs and your return of capital is important. So if we've gotten into the habit of asking most of our private money lending deals, we're at 6 months target, 3 months rehab, 3 months resale, pretty standard. But we find out that it goes one more extra month. It's easier to say up front and say, we're going to look at this from a 12-month perspective. This is what majority of hard money lenders do. I guess it took us a little longer to figure that out. Is, use the funds for 12 months with no penalty to pay back early. That way, if it goes 7 months and you still pay it off, everybody's happy because you were less than 12. But if you said 6 and you went to 7, nobody's happy. Same project. So different perspective. And again, as the bank is being the bank, collateral is most important, and it comes way before the ARV projections. So some of the key considerations, we want to look at comparable sales. We want to look at what the values, the comps are that support the existing home value. We want to look at the neighborhood and days on market. So we want to know how fast that property is going to sell, what's the trending market, and we want to know the property conditions and potential red flags. So we want to make sure that when we look at the rehab budget, and they have to have a rehab budget, if you're going to be the bank, right? And in Creative Real Estate University, I posted, and it's been a year, so I'll repost it in the file section, rehab budget schedule. Go ahead and use that, send it to potential lenders, and have them detail out what they're going to use the funds for. And then take a good look at it. Is everything accounted for? Have they Are they are there costs for repairs? Does it make sense? Um, if they think they can do kitchen cabinets for $500, uh, not in the market in the house that you're looking at because they're all granite countertops cost more than that. That could be a red flag. So understand the numbers. Again, that loan to value ratio, 70 cents, 75 cents. Know what your limits are and stick to it. Because that is your buffer for cost overruns, delays. It's protection against market shifts. It's the option in case the original plan changed. So having that extra margin of safety is what allows banks to stay calm, like I said, that calmer waters, if the project slips off track. And really where our experience has been, I've seen most deals go sideways, isn't really cost overruns, though we've seen those. It's really timeline risks. Different markets, um, heat up and cool down. Seasonality happens. Here we are, holidays. Nobody's buying houses, almost nobody. But number of houses that get sold between now and January 1 is much, much lower than it would be in, say, May. That carrying cost is important to you as the bank because if your capital is tied up on a deal, well, that's opportunity lost, on the next deal. And Cindy always tells me, says, good capital is always looking for the next deal and always in use and turning over. Idle money doesn't make any money. And again, always have an exit strategy. If the plan is for a fix and flip and you're relying on a sale of that property, what happens if that sale value doesn't happen, right? So if it was targeted for 300,000, well, maybe a good plan B is to rent that house out. Do a seller finance and sell it. Owner finance is a great way to get new leads in, but always ask and have prepared as the bank, always have that plan B. And as you work through a couple of different good clients, you can have and help structure that plan B and help them if they get stuck and say, okay, I know you were hoping to sell this house outright for cash. Let's see if we can get a DSCR loan in here, wrap it, and offer it as a, a seller finance deal. Um, that's a whole other show some other day. Well, when we operate as a bank, we're kind of looking at four possible scenarios, right? The best case scenario, everything goes well, everything goes to plan. Um, what was it Hannibal said that in the 18 minute? I always love it when a plan comes together. Um, the other scenario that we see quite often again is that delayed scenario. Renovation takes longer, resale takes longer. From the bank perspective, the question is your collateral structured and protected? Are you still making your monthly interest payments? Is the borrower, is he able to continue carrying that cost? And at least you're getting your monthly interest payments back every month. And the question is, how long can they survive on that mode? Um, if we see that market erosion scenario, right? So yeah, we're shooting for 300,000, but as we working through the project, we see the home prices coming down 280, 275, 250. What's the plan to exit the property? And if we exit the property, is there enough to cover your original loan? Um, you better make sure there's a good plan B. In the worst case scenario, hey, the operator can't complete the project. We've seen this on a few occasions. We've heard definitely a lot of horror stories around this is the worst case scenario. You loaned money on a project, and now you have a house that's in some form of renovation, gutted, definitely not in a for sale ready, and the borrower has no funds to finish the project. What do you do? Um, this is where you better have a good plan B of taking over the project. They've been unable to perform, so you need to step up and make a decision. Do you finish the project? Do you fire sale it as is? Um, Especially as a new lender, if you're going to be the bank, this is not the point where you want to start thinking about this, is when you're in the middle of it. You want to get ahead of this scenario. And if you get stuck, give me a call. Let's walk you through some options. Um, this is a case that we definitely don't want you in, and you don't want to be in. So banks aren't pessimistic. If they were pessimistic, they wouldn't ever lend, but they are prepared, and very conservative. Now, what I mean by that is, they assume that something will deviate from plan and structure deals accordingly. If you structure the deal accordingly, you mitigate some of those risks. You don't ever get rid of all the risks, but you want to make sure you have a plan to navigate all those risks. When you evaluate residential deals this way, you stop chasing for the perfect outcome and you start prioritizing the protected ones. And that's where your rule, and the return on repeat investors works best, is you put the risks in your favor and the returns in your favor. Risks are inevitable. They're always going to be risks, but loss is not. And what I mean by that, as a new investor, we tend to view risk as something that's to be avoided entirely. As an experienced investor and banks, they view risk as something completely different. There's going to be a risk in every house, every project. The question is, can we build enough contingency and alternate plans to mitigate all those risks so we're not avoiding doing anything, but we are maximizing our chance of the greatest return and the least amount of problems. Because as I've learned through all of this, I would rather have fewer problems than greater returns. Um, but you don't want to do all this and not have a decent return. But again, every investment carries risk. That's what separates the disciplined capital from the speculation. You being the bank, don't expect perfection, but don't deviate from your plan. So have a good plan, stick to it. The common risks of residential deals, right? Again, we talked about that time delay and renovation cost overruns, the softening market, and the borrower execution issues. That's really been the smaller of all of them, and it's the last one I put on here. But it is sometimes something that happens is we've seen not the market change or the project change, but the life circumstances of that borrower happened. Divorce, a death in the family, um, something along those lines, and all of a sudden the borrower can't finish the project because of a life event. Now what are you going to do? Um, Kind of have that plan and that scenario mapped out with you. When a residential renovation project began with strong numbers and experienced operator, no one really expects that delay, but delays happen. So we want to make sure that your capital is still protected. So especially when we start getting into long carrying times, that long, you know, as soon as you find out that the borrower is not paying you, right? A big red flag, but make sure that things like insurance are being carried, taxes are being paid. utilities are being paid. Any of those things that happen that aren't being paid, that's like huge red flags back to you because it means the money's running out. So don't let any of those slip. And again, I like to keep an eye on markets. So if I'm a lender on a deal, and we're wanting into it for 6 or 8 months, I just kind of put it on my watch. I like to kind of, again, I'm a real estate nerd, so I like to look at Zillow and I like to look at house prices and see what markets are doing. So I kind of look at that and kind of make sure that, hey, as we're in the market, everything's staying on track. That being said, as a private money lender, sometimes it's important for you to stay in a certain market. It's a market that you understand and you can follow. But if you're only doing one or two deals, it's easy enough to track one or two markets. But if you're doing 5 or 6 deals, it might get a little more complicated if you're spread out all over the US. Not every operator performs as expected. And this is where I think as a new private money lender, if you're going to be the bank, having work with somebody who has a proven track record. Don't start out being the first time being the bank, being a lender, working with someone who's a first time fix and flipper. Those two things put together can lead to disaster very, very quickly. So experience is very important. You want to not just pick a winning jockey, but a winning horse. So again, we talked about the loan to values, multiple exits. Let's talk a little bit about legal documentations. And again, that fear of missing out is important. So we want to make sure that we take the emotion out of it. We start looking at a lot of deals. People get frustrated because, hey, I haven't found the right deal. I haven't made any money in this. I want to do something. Um, there's some peer pressure there as well. We're watching other people do it and make money. Um, just stay calm. There's always another deal. Get clarity and stick to your rules when you're lending. One of the things I really enjoyed about being the bank, right, being the lender, being the source of capital, is it's a strategy, it's a mindset shift. Um, Now all of a sudden you look at it from a different perspective. Because once you start letting other people know that you have funds to invest, deals will come at you from everywhere. All of a sudden, your inbox will blow up with, "Ooh, would you like to go in on this deal or that deal?" Um, so once you go down the path of, "Hey, I want to be the bank. I want to be able to fund deals." Um, there is a blue ocean of opportunity out there. There really is. Find the right partners, find the right deals, and this whole thing then becomes much, much easier. When we look at who our ideal avatars are for private money lending side, because as a person who's also using private funds to fund deals, people that we look at as great partners are the busy professionals. That's like number one is, we have people who have W-2 jobs, have a family life. These are people who have capital. They want to make a good retirement. They want to be in real estate, but they don't necessarily always have the time and expertise to get it all done. They make great private money lenders. We have retirees or some people who are near retired, right? Again, trying to build that nest egg up. using a self-directed IRA or self-directed retirement account. They have so usually they'll have larger pools of money available for a project. Um, we've also seen like the burned out landlord. I've been there. Is you're in the real estate game, but you're tired of the tenants and the 2 a.m. phone calls and all those problems come with managing property. All of a sudden, you want the returns from real estate, but you don't want the headaches. So again, it's another great place to start looking for lenders. And then we always have that first time passive investor, right? Someone who's trying to get into real estate. They want the returns, but they don't necessarily know where to start yet. So those are always different types of people who want to, they may not know about being the bank, and being the lender is actually a great place for them all to be involved in real estate. And the common thread there, you don't have to be the owner to be in a deal. That's not the only way to participate in being in a real estate deal. So bringing the private capital, and that's definitely a different way to look at it and a way to leverage yourself into great returns. So we talk about your investment strategy, what strategy is and what it's not. What strategy is, it's education driven, right? Have the knowledge of how the system works, how the process works, how to do the underwriting and the deal flow. Um, Keep that a very structured focus. If you can do that and stay calm and be in the numbers, and make sure that it's all asset based. You know, I'm not going to give John $30,000 as a private loan for him to go do a rehab. We're going to tie that back to that house. We're going to put that on that loan, whether that's first senior secured position or a junior position. That's going to be tied to that asset. What the strategy is not is there's never a guarantee of income. Right? It is real estate. There is risks. It's not truly passive without understanding. It's much more passive than on the other side of the table, than trying to manage the projects, trying to manage the contractors, worrying about all the cost overruns. It's much more passive than that, but it's not truly passive until you structure the deals and get your systems in place. And it's definitely not speculative. It all starts with education, is knowing how this whole thing works. If this is your first time through and you want to be a private money lender, but you just don't quite know how it all works, find somebody who does it. Be more than happy to help you, and build that framework. There are plenty of people and systems you can buy in to do that, but if you're inside of Creative Real Estate University, we'll definitely help you along that journey and that path. And when we talk about why deals are the poor starting point, what I mean by that is, you start as a new investor, you come in that, success has to come from finding the right deal. Well, as being the bank and the institutional lenders, they all know better. They understand that the deals come and go, but it's the decision framework, the systems and processes you build that last and will sort out all of the good, the bad, the ugly. And once you start building those systems out, you will find the roses that'll pop up. When investors start with deals, they're always focused on the decision in the context of, is this going to be good? Is it going to be a great deal? How much am I going to make? Should I move forward? That's where that fear of missing out will start to creep in and make decisions for you emotionally. And you really want to park all that through and bring it down to the numbers. That way, it really comes down to a go, no go decision. Let the project numbers speak for itself. Start by understanding the language the terminology of being the bank, especially on the lending side, the legal side, know what that means, because as you're talking to title companies, as you're talking to lenders, as you're reading through contracts, those things need to be consistent and understood. Um, know what collateral means, what is collateral, how is it secured, you know, knowing what state you're in, because laws are different in different markets, is also very important. Build some case studies first, right? A great athlete, they train, they visualize that victory long before they actually do it, especially on tournament day. So build your case studies, build your even a fictitious deal flow. What's that going to look like? What happens here? What happens for this next step? What happens if this one went wrong? Who's doing this part? If you do all those things, you'll start to build out a very smooth and robust system that keeps everything on track, everybody in the right communication lanes. Um, all those things that become very, very important when things go sideways. And always, if you can, find somebody who's doing deals. That's one of the reasons we're here tonight, right? Is to share what we've learned. Again, this is the reason Cindy and I started Creative Real Estate University. We didn't start it to collect money from people. We didn't really do it to teach and educate. We really created it to give back to those who supported us over the years. Share what we've learned, because we've gone through the school of hard knocks, sometimes twice, sometimes three times. And you take those lumps and you want to be able to share that with people who are just getting started and starting out, so that they don't have to take all those same whacks to the noggin before they learn something. So learn from our pains and our experiences, and also hopefully benefit from our successes as well. Um, Again, that fear of missing out, right? You feel that pressure you have to do a deal. That's when you pump the brakes, slow down. And if you need to ask somebody else about the project and say, hey, I think I'm too emotionally tied to this one, can you review it for me? Find somebody to do that with. If things aren't clearly explained or provided, that's another red flag. Pump the brakes. We were talking about this tonight. If we need to make more checklists of documents that are required before proceeding, especially stage gates or milestones of a project, right? Nothing's ever missed. It's always the same. We got to make sure that these forms are turned in and completed 100% before the release of money, or we're allowed to go on to the next stage. Start building those systems out. Over reliance on future appreciation. We start looking at projects and ARVs. That's where we go look at and get excited, because, this is going to be worth $350,000. We know that this is now all of our profits based on that. We could potentially make $150,000 on this project. Well, how sure are we about that? Is that the borrower's best guess based on the few cherry-picked comps that they did? Is it based on a realtor's market valuation? Is it actually based on an appraisal? We might come up with some very different numbers based on how we ask and who we ask for that evaluation. And then I've seen that number right there get more people in trouble than anything else. And any resistance that you get from your borrower to questions, again, red flag, right? They're the ones, this is their opportunity to be open with everything, and they should be able to provide you any detail that you ask for. Education becomes before opportunity. And again, I think that comes down to how and why we created Creative Real Estate University. But by the time you get to this point, there's a difference in how I've been taught to think about real estate and everything else is that that realization is intentional, right? So is you want to be able to start looking at deals and formulating your plans. Sometimes you want to be the bank in a deal, put money to use. Sometimes you want to be the borrower and use private funds. The reason that sometimes investors like myself do both is because I have funds that need to be moved all the time. So we want to be in a deal. If it's my deal, great. I've done that. I do it all the time. But sometimes I don't have a project, but I have some great partners who I know will perform. I do the underwriting, look at the deal, and put my money to work on their project. That way, that money always stays fluid. The goal is that money works harder than me and brings in more capital and than I do. So hopefully someday that nest egg is big enough that my grandchildren will feel it. That's the hope and plan. Um, my role here is not to convince people to invest with anything I do. It's really not. That's not why I'm here tonight. It's here to help them understand how capital works so that you can decide if you wanted to be a private money lender and be the bank and figure out how to get involved in deals in a more passive role than maybe you thought you could be. Just want to give you another option to real estate. One of the things I love about being in real estate is that there's a million ways of making $1 million. The thing that frustrates me the most about real estate is that there's a million ways to make $1 million. And so many people start just chasing that other shiny object that they never really make any progress. Well, here's an opportunity for you to think a little differently, and you can be involved in a project and maybe not have to chase down contractors and chase down deals and do all the underwriting and buy it and take on all that equity risk position. So if I can help you in any way, I'm here for you. And again, the big milestones there is before you take on any new opportunity as a private money lender is, understand the risk, understand where your capital is in the capital stack, and what questions to ask and what red flags to avoid. If you can figure those four things out, this whole thing becomes much, much easier. River Life Capital, this is our finance part of our business, outside of Creative Real Estate University, where we provide, our free education, if you will, we do run a business, and River Life Capital is where we provide funding for deals. We provide hard money access and we provide some private money access, and we also raise private funds for our own deals. What we want to do and what we continue to do, we fund 3 to 4 houses, not quite 4, but 3 houses a month, and we would like to scale into closer to 4 as we head into 2026, which is right around the corner. As we do that, we want to make sure that our deals are very conservative. We've been through some fix and flips where we've seen market change. I think as we look in the overall market in 2026, my crystal ball isn't perfect, but I think if we just continue to see interest rates drop, so I think as interest rates drop, we're going to continue to spur continued buying. So I think you're getting very market specific. I think you're going to see some great opportunities coming through this next spring into summer. We want to make sure we get the documentation, the paperwork, and the procedures very, very clear. From our perspective, Cindy and I, River Life Capital, we are working very diligently to clear up documentation path so that our TCs, our transaction coordinators, as we do deals, they have a packet that gets delivered to our lenders, the same, on time, repeatability, and really drive communication as a project's ongoing. So I think the biggest strides we're going to make here in the next month or two is on that path, is really cleaning up and strengthening the documentation and communication. But that's a lot of that is internal to us and our procedures and processes. We always have defined exit strategies. We actually are building in, we always look at projects with two exit strategies. This one, if we're going in as a fix and flip, we always say, okay, what happens if we have to hold this property long term? And do we hold it as a rental? Do we flip it over to a pad split or co-living property? What's the other option? Is this a Airbnb market? Or just do a long-term rental hold? Is having that clear plan B to us is very important. And we continue to run Creative Real Estate University, or Creative Real Estate University. And as we look into 2026, we are having some great ideas on actually how to grow that group. And we're hoping that everybody kind of participates, because as we go into 2026, we want to bring in more experts, and we'll be talking about having some professorships open up. We were going to have some hopefully standing guests that do recurring shows on things like how to find deals, how to underwrite deals, how to be a transaction coordinator and do paperwork. While we'll still continue to talk about our journey and the capital side of things, probably my primary focus going in 2026 for Creative Real Estate University is going to be talking about private capital and hard money financing and how to fund your deals. But man, I'm really going to hammer down on private money lending this year. I think that's really where we're going to see the most growth for myself personally. So I want to share that with you, and hopefully you can join along in the journey. And again, my kind of final conclusion tonight, that the be the bank mindset. Wealth in real estate is not created by owning more. It's created by understanding your position, structure, and risk, right? Get that knowledge. Make sure you spend some time getting yourself educated in this journey long before you pull the trigger on anything. Banks don't rely on hype, the speed, or perfection, right? They ask better questions. That's all it comes down to. And if you have funds to put into a deal, we can show you how to do that and structure it so that your risks are minimized and how you can make great returns. If you wanted to really stick around, we will look and talk about, even if you don't have access to all the funds needed for a deal, but how you can leverage other people's capital into a deal. That's a whole nother show for another time. So a couple key takeaways. Again, that capital sits at the center of every real estate deal. It's something we've learned a long time ago, was that everybody asks, where do I get the capital to do my deal? If you can figure out how to be the answer to that, you can leverage your way into a lot of different projects. Position of the capital stack matters more than the upside projections. Again, if you're not in the right lean position for the right reasons, sometimes there's a reason you want to be a gap lender, but you got to understand the risks and the reward for that. If you're in first lien position, you get a certain risk and a certain interest rate. By being in second lien position, we put you in a much higher interest rate, but there's more assumed risk. You have to understand that risk and reward balance. I want you to understand that risk is a manageable thing, but it's got to be addressed before you ever send money into a project. Understand it, have mitigation plans in place. What if scenarios, you'll be protected. education creates that confidence, right? So learn how the deals work, the paperwork works, the protections work through the what if scenarios. If you understand that whole process, and then you can be very, very confident about it. And understand, please, that discipline outperforms urgency every time. So know your process, know your rules, stick to your guns. So kind of next steps, as a, if you want to be the bank, I say continue learning. I'm going to start a reoccurring series. We're going to talk about this probably every 2 weeks through January, February, March. And let's see how we can grow. I'd like to do some case studies. I would like to have some guests come on. So as we do this, I'd like to reach out to a few of the attendees and let's have you on. Let's see what kind of case examples we can come up with. So ask better questions. You know how to find me. Find me in Creative Real Estate University. I have links there. You can book a call with me. I still have hours a day that I give up for one-on-ones. So, and I don't charge for it. So let's talk strategy. And I want you to observe how disciplined capital is deployed. So if you are just getting into this, you think you want to be a private money lender, but you want to know how that whole process works, book a call. There's a strategy button right there. I'll send you a copy of this and you can be the bank, you can deploy capital in the deal, you can make a great return, and you can do it safely. So look forward to hearing from you. We'll talk soon. Have a great night.